Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. It's great to have you all here today. Hope everyone's doing well, and happy April 9th, 2023. Let's go over to our agenda and we'll take a look at what we're going to cover today. First up, ear training. This is not just for musicians, not just for it's not just for musicians, it's also for anyone that's working in audio in any fashion. And what we're going to do is a couple of exercises that actually comes from this book. This is called Mastering Audio, The Art and the Science, 3rd edition. This is by an engineer named Bob Katz, and he had several recommendations for some ear training exercises. We're going to run through a few of those today. And what these are, why do this? The question, why do this, is because it will help us to identify potential issues while we're recording and solve issues in post-production. Actually solve them during recording as well, obviously. So that's the reason for doing this. I've heard a lot of people say, I'm not really an audio expert and I can't really hear what you're talking about. Most people can learn these. You can train your ears to hear things that you didn't think you could hear before, you didn't hear before. And a lot of this is actually your brain. I don't know, a lot of people don't necessarily realize that. Your auditory system, a big piece of that is your brain. It's not just your ears. So really important, some things that we're going to cover here today. We also have some questions that were submitted ahead of time. And then, of course, we'll go over to the chat to get those questions as well. So let's go ahead and start. And what I want to do is I am going to first play for you some audio samples that demonstrate different potential issues, and then give you a chance to hear maybe in some cases before and after, in some cases just the issue itself. And then we'll come back and take a deeper look at that particular item. So what I want to do is first let's take a look at frequency ranges and EQ. So this is something that I did a video some time ago about EQing dialogue audio, and the focus was identifying resonances and other things that didn't sound great in people's voices and actually cutting some of those out. That's usually the first step that I do with EQ when I'm using EQ in post-production for spoken word audio. And I think there were not a lot of people, but some people that said, I just don't understand what I'm listening for when I boost the frequency and sweep it back and forth. And what you have to do, I think, is you have to train your ears so you can hear these potential issues. And what I want to do here is I want to play for you a little bit of pink noise. We can actually show this one. We can go to the Mac on this one, Danny. So let's go over to the Mac here, and I've got a variety of different samples here. And one of them is just plain old pink noise. And what I'll do here is, oh, it looks like it got zoomed way in. We'll zoom way out. Whoops. We need this to, okay. There we go. Okay, pink noise. We got it. This is what pink noise sounds like, first of all. That's not playing through for me. Go ahead and cut back to me, Danny. Okay, we need to solve a little problem here ourselves. Let's see what's happening here. Computer music should still be on. Audition seems to have possibly reset itself. Oh, I didn't unmute it. There's the problem. Okay, let's cut back to the Mac and play some pink noise for you. Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and measure this pink noise. If I come back over to here, and we've got the pink noise, we can just go ahead and scan it. Here's the frequency response of pink noise. If we look at the entire pink noise clip that I have there, we have more bass than we do the higher frequencies. And this is actually fairly useful here because it sort of mimics how we generally hear the world, certainly with speech. And so that's what pink noise is. First of all, that's the first note. But watch what happens when I bring out an equalizer, and I want to boost different frequencies and cut different frequencies so you can hear what that sounds like. So at first, I should say, one thing I forgot to talk about before was that you really need to be using some decent headphones or speakers here. So get the best headphones you have available and settle in, and let's enjoy this together, a little bit of ear training. So let me just play with this equalizer while we play back the pink noise so you can hear what it does. Come back over here to our multi-track. We'll bring up our equalizer. Okay, and here we go. Okay, let me just explain for just a moment here what I was doing. So at first, what we did is we turned on a high pass filter, and I swept up and cut out the lower frequencies. So again, this is what that sounds like. Let's go back to the start and play that again. So right now you're hearing roughly everything above 3 kilohertz or 3000 hertz, and basically very little below that. So that's the first thing to know, is be able to identify, okay, we're losing some of our low frequencies. Do that again. Okay, now we did the same thing on the high end. So I have a high shelf, and actually we're using it as a high cut, and it sounds like this as I cut out the high frequencies so that you're just hearing the lower frequencies. Here we go. Okay, and then finally what we did is we boosted and swept this boost. This is a 9 decibel boost, so we're boosting by 9 decibels and sweeping that back and forth. So we're emphasizing here initially the bass, and then we moved to the mid-range around a kilohertz, 1 kilohertz, and then we also went up to 10 kilohertz, so you can hear the differences there. So here we go with that again. Okay, and for the musicians among us, I ended at A440, so 440 hertz, so you could hear what that sounds like. So there's just a first kind of step. Now, it's a little easier with pink noise to hear those very distinct differences. It's a little bit trickier when you're listening to spoken word, because spoken word is changing all the time. This is kind of just equal energy, random noise that's pretty constant, consistent. But once you get into voices, it can start to sound takes a little bit more practice, and we're going to get some of that practice here today. So that was the first thing I wanted to start with. Let's now go up to the top here, and I want to demonstrate something. Actually, Danny, if you'd cut back to me. So I don't want you to see what I'm doing here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play a sample for you. It is actually 2 tracks, one panned all the way left, one panned all the way right, and you will hear a difference at some point. So again, best possible headphones that you've got available to you or speakers. I will warn you, if you're on an Android phone watching this right now, some Android phones, and actually also some playback speakers, if you're using like a Bluetooth speaker or anything like that, that sums down to mono, and some, not all, but some Android phones actually take stereo audio and sum it down to mono. You actually may not hear part of this. So here we go. Is the color quality of LEDs in 2023 as good as traditional tungsten or halogen lights for video? Have a close look at the skin tones and the got 6 different colors in its lighting engine, but notice how the skin tones are a bit dull compared to the tungsten lamp. Next up, we have we looked at before, but this time it creates. Okay, so there's a sample there. If you know what just happened, go ahead and put that in the chat. Love to see what you see there. Also, this is a safe learning space, so I would encourage everyone to participate here. Put in the chat what you think just happened there, and we'll take a closer look here and describe. We're trying to make a learning environment where everyone, even beginners, can learn some of these basic principles so that you can become better sound people, better soundies overall. So, all right. We're just looking here to see what happens here. Tim Dixon says phase inversion. Sunrise Water Media says, makes me feel kind of sick, LOL. I agree, actually. Teachers ask stereo versus mono. Actually, no, both. They were both, it's technically stereo. Dual mono, I would say. Charles says, I couldn't tell. Ignorant me felt like mono to stereo and back. No, you're not. Don't worry. This is why we're doing this right now. Mark Holloway, from stereo 2-track to mono single track to both left and right. Let me actually show you. Let's jump on over to the Mac again. And
this is my favorite though. Wait.
What's that? Curtis is trying to sound like an AM DJ. Thank you, Audio Buff. You were so close, so close.
Okay.
Let me just show you what we have here. So we have, scroll and get them on the screen. So we played back just these top 2. We have the exact same audio on the top track as the bottom track. So it's actually a copy, literally a copy. And what I've done is the top one I've panned all the way left. The bottom one I panned all the way right. So this is what we would call dual mono. And so it's the exact same thing playing back on both your left, either in your left ear or your right ear, regardless of what you're using. And then what I did is I actually inverted the polarity of the right channel, the one that's panned all the way right. What that means in practical terms is that this was perfect constructive or destructive interference. Destructive interference. So this is a phase issue. So what I did is I took these 2 audio waveforms, which are the exact same thing, played one in your left ear, one in your right ear. And if we go in really close, you won't be able to see this, but I could be able to explain it. Where I put the playhead right here, notice where this particular part of the waveform is cresting right here. So this is the condensation. So it's above the center line. The center line is right here. So it's going up and it's peaking right here. When it inverted the polarity, this one was actually playing so that the waveform was down at the exact same moment. And so if you sum these 2 together in a mono playback system, you actually get silence because they cancel each other out. So,
but it's not showing that.
But it's not showing it right now because when
on your display.
Correct. Danny's right. It's not showing this on my display. This phase invert doesn't actually show it, but that's what's happening in terms of the audio that's being sent to your speakers or headphones or whatever. So that's what's happened here. So that is out of phase audio. And sometimes it can be less obvious here. And in fact, let's go back to the start and let's zoom back out some. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this particular, the right channel here, and you can see we're down at the sample level now. That's what each of these dots are. They're a sample. Let's just move it. Let's see here. Let's get back to the start. Okay, let's just move it a few samples. Just a few samples. So we'll take it and we'll move it 1, 2, 3 samples to the right. Let's play this back again. See what we get this time. Is the color quality of LEDs in 2023 as good as traditional tungsten or halogen lights for video? Have a close look at the skin. Not much. Let's move it a few more. 3 more samples. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Is the color quality of LEDs in 2023 as good as traditional tungsten or halogen lights for video? Have a close look at the skin tone. Okay, let's move it some more. Is the color quality of LEDs in 2023 as good as traditional tungsten or halogen lights for video? Okay, did you notice that? Did you hear that difference? That's out of phase audio. And let's actually cut back to the main camera here. What I want to explain, when can this happen in production? This can easily happen in production when you have someone wearing a lavalier microphone and using a boom microphone. And those two microphones are different distances from the sound source. And so they can be captured like this. And you will often hear something that sounds a little bit off, kind of like this, when you're recording in those circumstances. So that's something to understand. What can you do if that's driving you a little bit batty when you're wearing your headphones and monitoring through the whole thing? You can do a couple things. You can make a headphone preset that only sends one of the microphones to your headphones. That's one option. Another option is to invert the phase or invert the polarity of one of the channels. And most of the pro level, like the MixPres and the Zoom F series and above, have a phase or a polarity invert. So you can, it might hopefully get you closer to where you were. In fact, let's play this one, continue playing this one back, and see if we invert the polarity, if it makes a difference in how it sounds. Here we go. Let's go back to the Mac. Have a close look at the skin tones and the color chart. Disregard the background. Up on top, we have our halogen light, and on the bottom is a budget RGB ACL LED light. It's got 6 different colors in its lighting engine, but notice how the skin tones are a bit dull compared to the tungsten. I don't think either of those are amazing, but what you can do is you can use that polarity invert while you're recording to see if one of them is a little bit more comfortable to listen to. So that's one thing to take into account when we're thinking about this from the perspective of production sound. And then in post-production, we did a vocal line live stream a few weeks ago, probably 4 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, somewhere in that range, where there's an app that will actually line these up for you. So you can do it manually in some cases. If you have somebody who's moving, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. Whoops, here we go. But those are some things to consider, and you should be able to identify that as a phase issue. That is to say that you're listening to 2 audio sources and one is out of phase from the other. Usually it's the same sound source being captured by 2 different microphones. So, and also, honestly, that's some of the principles that we rely on for stereo recordings. That's what gives a stereophonic effect to some extent. And that's how we, say, for example, if you're walking down the street and you're listening to see if there's any traffic coming behind you, that's part of how we recognize that, is that the sound will move through that space and it will arrive at one ear before the other. And that's actually how you can make judgments about where something is in relation to where you're at. And in fact, that's how binaural sound works and so on and so forth. So really important to be able to identify that and have a couple of ideas for how to address that. Okay, so that's the phase. Let's also, by the way, comb filtering. Comb filtering is related to out of phase audio. And what happens with comb filtering, the reason it's called comb filtering is, remember I talked about this concept of if you have something that's perfectly one audio clip recording, let's say, and you have the exact same audio recording on a different track that's phase inverted, one on the left channel, one on the right channel, they cancel each other out. They experience perfect destructive interference. Comb filtering is when it's not perfect. It's when it's maybe a little bit offset from each other, and they interact and they start to interfere with each other. And you can get strange sound that way as well. So that's what comb filtering is. When you hear that term, that's what that means. Okay, let's go ahead. We have a question, it looks like. Charles, so is boom and lav separation sometimes good for dimension? I actually don't. I think for adding dimension, the way I usually think of it is not so much by creating phase differences, but instead by the two different microphones capturing different frequencies and blending them can add additional dimension to the voice. I do believe they have to be in phase, though. If this is my own perspective, I think they need to be in phase because otherwise you get that weird kind of disorienting feel. It does not sound natural at all. If you have them perfectly in phase, again, using a tool like VocAlign that we talked about a few weeks ago, then you can have the benefit of, like, for example, a lavalier usually mounted somewhere here on the chest. It's generally going to pick up a little bit more chest resonance, so you're going to get a little more weight to that voice. And if you have a boom mic that's sounding a little bit thin, blending the two of those together, as long as they're in phase, can help kind of fatten up or bring a little bit more weight to that overall dialogue. So that's how I would think of that. All right. Camille, thanks so much for the 2 cappuccinos. Appreciate that. Hope everything's well. I see that Acoustica has adaptive and fixed phase rotation. Any opinions on that implementation? Yes. I have used the adaptive phase rotation, and it does pretty much as well. It worked almost as well as iZotope's. iZotope's seemed to do a little bit better in my experience, but they were pretty close. They were really quite close. And Acoustica is a fair bit less expensive than RX. So when I use that adaptive phase rotation, what I'm usually trying to do is address asymmetric waveforms where above the line, the waveform is substantially taller than it is below, or vice versa. And what that does is it just it robs you of headroom. It makes it so that you have to compress harder to get to a certain loudness level. So usually I will use that adaptive phase rotation to even things out so I don't have to do as much compression. So, and as far as Acoustica's is quite good. iZotope seemed a little bit better. Tiny bit better. Just a tiny bit. Okay.
We have a couple other questions that we will get to later.
Okay, questions we will come back to later. Let's keep going here. The next one we want to do is compression. And what I'm going to have is, I'm going to have Danny talk, and I'm going to apply, actually, no, we're going to come back to your talking. We're going to do that for loudness. Let's just give you a couple of examples here. I want to play some samples here for you. I'm going to go back and forth, and I want you to listen and in your mind, identify which of these is compressed and which one is not. You can hear the difference. Here we go. Okay, first mute those. And here we go. Is the color quality of LEDs in 2023 as good as traditional tungsten or halogen lights for video? Have a close look at the skin tones and the color chart. Disregard the background. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Was that compressed or was that not compressed? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. Next sample from the same clip. Up on top, we have our halogen light, and on the bottom is a budget RGB ACL LED light. It's got 6 different colors in its lighting engine, but notice how the skin tones are a bit dull. Next up, we have a Pro lighting panel with RGB WW LEDs. It does a better job than the cheaper LED we looked at before, but this time it creates a yellow tint on the. And finally, here's the best LED match we've found so far. This is the Amaran 200XS. As you can see here, color quality seems. As you can see here, the color quality seems much more accurate across the skin tones, and that's because it uses actually 3 different white colored LEDs. So, okay, this is a tough one.
They're getting it.
Everybody's getting it?
They say the first one is compressed.
The first one was compressed, that's correct.
Yeah.
The first one was compressed and the second one was uncompressed. Let me just run through it again with you and point it out for those that are just starting and didn't quite catch the difference there. Let's do that again. So let's go over to the Mac. We're going to zoom in here. All right, on top, this is the compressed sample, and this is the uncompressed sample. Let's go back to the start. Okay, we were playing compressed first. Is the color quality of LEDs in 2023 as good as traditional tungsten or halogen lights for video? Have a close look at the skin tones in the color chart, disregard the background. Switching over. Up on top, we have our halogen light, and on the bottom is a budget RGB ACL LED light. It's got 6 different colors in its lighting engine, but notice how the skin tones are a bit dull compared to the tungsten lamp. Next up, we have a Pro lighting panel with RGB WW Back to LEDs. compressed. It does a better job than the cheaper LED we looked at before, but this time it creates a yellow tint on the skin tones. And then finally, uncompressed LED match we've found so far. This is the Amaran 200XS. As you can see here, color quality seems much more accurate. As you can see here, the color quality seems much more accurate across the skin tones, and that's because it uses actually 3 different white colored LEDs. So we are in fact starting to see LED lights with SSI scores in the 90s, which produce results that are very close to traditional halogen lighting instruments. Okay, so what to listen for when you're trying to hear whether or not something is compressed. It just sounds a little bit more constricted, a little bit more evened out, depending on how the compression was applied. But the overall feeling is that there's less dynamic range. That's really kind of the purpose of compression, is to manage your dynamic range. Excuse me. And that one's a fairly subtle example, so that was a more challenging one, and we can do something more extreme than that. In fact, let's just check right now.
I have a comment.
Danny says we have a comment here from Matt. At my age, I just fighting growing old. It's not lack of training. It's simply as I enter my 60s, I have to just accept my age limits. Yes, I'm not too far behind you there, Matt. Okay, so let me just give another example really quickly. So I have all of my dialogue that I've spoken here has been compressed so far. We're using the Shelford channel today. Let me go ahead and turn the compressor off. Okay, the compressor is now turned off, and I just need to make sure that I'm not running dangerously hot. No, it probably dropped my levels quite a bit, so I'll have to compensate for that. Let me go ahead and boost the levels again. Okay, so now we're back up to the levels roughly that I was at before, but we are not compressed. And now I'm going to go ahead and talk for just a few moments here, and then I'm going to switch it back and turn the compressor back on. Okay, now the compressor is turned back on, and you can hear that. Now, you have to be careful. You have to detangle any differences in overall loudness. Of course, what I'm using a compressor for here is to manage the overall dynamic range. In essence, what you can think of it as the louder and the softer are getting closer so that I can boost the overall levels without clipping is in essence what's happening here. That's one way to think about using compression for spoken word audio. So hopefully that gives you some insights there for compression. Let's pause there. Any questions or comments that we need to cover? Danny's taking a look here for us.
No, we have the kind of unrelated
Okay.
questions.
Other questions we're going to come back to in a little bit, so we will come back to those. Okay. Let's see here. So that's hearing compression. Let's do our next test. Be ready on, we're not going to show this one. I want to play it first and have you all hear it, and then we'll come back and talk about it. But this one is something that you need to be able to recognize very readily. And here we go. If you're making YouTube videos and you're happy with the results you're getting with your camera and your lights, that's great. I'm not here to convince you that you need to ditch all your existing lights and buy new lights. However, if you are someone that is working for clients, you're a director of photography or you're a Okay, enough of that. Thank you very much. Let's hear in the chat what's going on there. What is the problem that we've encountered there? Incredibly important to be able to identify this quickly and address it when you're recording so that you don't lose your entire recording session. Clipping. Let's go ahead and put them up on the screen. See what people have to say. Charles Ack, yes. Clipping, indeed. Clipping, yes. Good ears, everybody. Rag and Bone Puppet Theater clipping massively. Yep.
Oh,
Holy
no.
clipped audio, Batman. Yep. Sounds like. I can't believe you said that, audio buff. Sounds like sound speeds. Is Alan here to defend himself at the very least?
No. If he is, he's hiding.
If he is, he's hiding. In any case, that was clipped audio. And in fact, let's show that to you. Let's come in and here's the thing. Look at those waveforms. What do you notice right away? It's actually not up against 0 dB. That's the first thing. Secondly, completely squared off. It looks like someone took a laser cutter and just chopped it off left and right. And the reason I did that actually is because if I had played this at full volume without changing it at all, everyone's ears would be bleeding right now, which is not a kind thing to do. As it was bad enough, but this was actually quite a bit louder when I originally recorded that. So that's clipping. That means your gain is set too high. You're pushing the audio levels into the analog to digital converter too high, and the converter has to just chop them off at some point, and it just has that awful distorted sound. So what that means, you need to reduce your gain or your input level substantially. Okay, let's go back to the main camera here. We're going to show you, we've got one more sample here for you today. Oh yeah, one more sample. So I'm going to mute that one we were just playing. And I'm going to play another one. This is a recording I made outdoors. Tell me what's wrong with this one. All right, there we go. Pulling on my glove. This is jittery. Sorry for that. Okay, here's what it looks like in dual camera mode. So I can talk and be captured on this. Whoa, stay in the tracks here. I can be on the front camera and we can have the back camera going at the same time, and using the wireless me right here. Pretty cool. So we'll see. That's how that works. Okay. In the chat, let us know, what do you hear there? What is the problem in that case? And it'll take clothing rustle there. Well, actually what I'm doing is I'm outside. You can hear some traffic. It was really snowy, so I was walking on a snowy pathway. And so we were catching some of that. There was probably a little bit of clothing rustle. Was there? Yeah, probably a little bit of clothing rustle as well. Yep. That's actually not the problem I was referring to. Phasing. Not so much phasing, not handling noise. Not wind. We managed the wind pretty well there. I'm with Tim. Clothing. Okay. Fair enough. No vibration dampening. So I was using, what are they called? Switch pod. So I was essentially doing a vlog style recording with my phone and the Rode wireless microphone system. I was wearing transmitter on my jacket, and I was holding the receiver out in front of me. Footfalls, bumping the mic, all good guesses. Not enough signal to noise ratio. Okay. Not enough wind suppression and no mic isolation. Breath. You're actually getting closer, Camille. That's actually a good insight because the breaths were really prominent. That's a clue to what the problem was. Wind sounds captured, no dead cats. I actually did have a fur cover on the microphone. So there actually was wind protection. Let me just show you this. Danny, if you'd switch over to the
here's
Mac.
another one. Oh, I can
Distance from mic. It was clipped to me, so it wasn't so much that.
Okay, you need the Mac?
Yeah, here is what we're looking at. This green waveform. This is an example of a limiter set too aggressively. And that's why the breaths become very, very prominent.
Oh, is that this one?
That's the one we just listened to. So let me go ahead and play it back again for you. Listen carefully here and notice that it's over limited in dual camera mode. So I can talk and be captured on this. Whoa, stay in the tracks here. I can be on the front camera and we can have the back camera going at the same time, and using the wireless me right here. Okay, notice how it kind of starts to sound like it's sounding squished is basically, I don't know how else to say it, but it's sounding very compressed. And that's because what we did is we applied a limiter, but applied it way too aggressively. So basically, if you zoom in here, let's go here, all these waveforms are chopped off right here. And in fact, if I come over here into this view, they're all heavily, heavily brick wall limited to minus 15 decibels. So nothing gets past minus 15. Okay, wait 1 second here. Danny has a question. We're going to enable her mic. Go ahead and switch back to the main cam for us. Okay.
I didn't mean to ask it live.
Go ahead.
I wanted to just whisper it to you so you could... How is that different from the compression, chopping off the peaks?
Glad you asked. It is very much the same, except even more aggressive. So that's an example of a compressor and a limiter are basically at their core the same thing. The distinction is that a limiter uses a more aggressive ratio, so something in the 10-to-1 or greater range. In fact, a lot of digital limiters, brick wall limiters in particular, are infinity-to-1 compression ratios, which means that any audio that comes in amplitude up to the threshold is automatically stopped there and just turns into like it was just sawed off, laser cut off. Nothing goes beyond that. And it starts to get this almost sort of distorting sound. It's not the same as clipping in terms of the buzzing, but there is some of that feel to it. Even though you're technically not clipping, it just sounds very constrained in a really sort of weird, it just makes a weird effect in your ears. So that's one to watch out for too. That's an example of basically really extreme compression is what it is. Okay. All right, let's go check the chat and see what we have going in the chat. Any questions so far in today's ear training? Seeing it makes it much easier to identify. So that's part of when you're doing the ear training, being able to see and hear it at the same time helps you really identify and kind of internalize what that is. And then at some point, you should be able to identify it just with your ears. You start to get to a point where you get enough experience and careful listening, and you'll be able to identify it just by listening to it. One that typically will elude many people. Both achieve similar purposes, but limiters tend to be set much more aggressively to protect audio circuitry. Indeed. And you have to be really careful with those. Usually, you just want to use them at the closer to 0 dB so that you're not... Here, in this case, it was minus 15. And we were boosting the levels into the limiter. So it was getting that really kind of, ooh, I don't know how else to describe it, but that strange kind of constrained sound. Okay.
I think we should do the questions so that then we can get to the other questions.
Okay. Oh my goodness, we're way into okay, we're going to do our questions here. So let's jump over to our question and answer. These are some that were sent in ahead of time. So first from Andrew, I will be doing live sound reinforcement for a speaking event and will also need to record the sound for podcast and video purposes. My setup will be a wired dynamic mic and a Sennheiser E935 into a transformer isolated microphone splitter, the ART Pro Split. Split number 1 will go into an audio recorder, a MixPre 3, and split number 2 will go into a mixing board, which is a Yamaha MG10XU, which then feeds the audio out to dual 31-band equalizers, DBX231s, and active speakers, a Yamaha DXR 12. So probably, I'm assuming 2 of those or maybe more. Okay. I will be getting additional backup recordings from the board and a room recording. I will add some high and low pass roll-offs and sweetening EQ from the equalizers. I'll be using some slight one-knob compression from the mixer and will back this off if there are any signs of feedback. I have been advised that there are unlikely to be feedback issues with adequate speaker placement. However, I'm concerned about possible feedback issues in the live environment. As a live sound mixer, should I be training my ears so that I know which frequencies are causing problems? Are there any apps or equipment that can assist the process, or any other advice you may have? Yeah, so Andrew, I think that's a fantastic question, and it's actually a really good one, which is just kind of redundant, to be honest. But there is an app I would recommend. Let me just find it here on my phone. It's called RTA Audio. RTA stands for Real-Time Analyzer, and it is a real-time analyzer, a frequency analyzer. I don't know if you can see this very well. There we go. So as I talk, you can see it is showing the frequency response while I talk. As I get it closer, you'll probably see it there. It's responding a little bit more. Something like this can be helpful in ear training as well. So what feedback is usually you have a resonance in the room. Something is being some frequency is being massively amplified in that space, and then it comes in so strongly that it gets back into the microphone and then makes this loop and woo, all the weird feedback noise that you get. Usually to solve that problem, you want to find what those frequencies are and attenuate them or pull them down with an equalizer. That's often how you will address that in live sound reinforcement. So having this app, again, this one was called RTA Audio. I'm on iOS, so I don't know. There's probably a bunch of them on Android as well. But that's one I would recognize or would recommend, and that in as much as possible, I would highly recommend getting practice in as much as you can, because I know how stressful it can be when you're doing live sound, getting things set up. And then the thing with live sound that's so interesting as well is that when you're doing your sound check, you're going to be like, oh yeah, everything is perfect. Everything is perfect. And then the audience shows up and it completely changes the environment, the acoustical environment. When you get a bunch of people in a space, the environment changes. And so you may have to address issues on the go as things get started. So you do your best to get prepared ahead of time, and then you have to be on your toes to address any other issues that may arise once the audience gets there. But that RTA audio is really good. What I would recommend too is taking that around with you and going near different sound sources and take your best guess at, okay, what's the frequency range that this is centered at, or where is it focused? And then you can use your real-time analyzer to confirm that and to start to teach yourself where those different frequencies are. So that's the biggest thing that I would recommend there. And that EQ, I would use it. Yeah, you can use it for sweetening, but I think it's the biggest use of EQ in live situations like that is to address potential feedback issues as well. Okay, another question here. This is about stereo recording from Aria. I have a scenario, a dance class teaching some solo dancing, room to fit 10 to 20 people, Latin style, wood floor, tall ceiling, walls of drywall or concrete, and mirror wall. I want to get a recording of the participants' sounds, foot stomps, and laughs and general ambiance without a lavalier microphone. However, the teacher has a lavalier microphone to capture the voice of the teaching, but where and how to place one or two mics, I assume you mean here, to capture the dancers themselves. Last week I tried using an AB, that's a stereo recording technique, at the front of the room facing the people. It was maybe like 8 to 12 feet apart, 2 feet high, aimed upward at the participant's mouth. This week I will try an XY ORTF, these again are stereo recording techniques, and keep the mic in the center where the teacher is facing to the participants. I use a Zoom H5 and F1, experimented with attaching the different microphone capsules from Zoom, the XY H5, the SG H6, which is a shotgun microphone capsule, and the SSH6. Not sure what that one is, but now we'll try a pair of small diaphragm condenser microphones and see what results I can get. Just experimenting and curious if you had any quick feedback. I would actually try a couple of things. First of all, I would try an ORTF configuration of your mics, which is I'm not going to go into all the details here. You can look it up on Wikipedia and I'll give you a little bit more detail. But basically, you have two microphones configured. Something like this, the distance between them is very important for the ORTF method. And then I would actually put that, if you can, up higher and aim it down to see if you get a better perspective for what you're trying to achieve there. That would be the first thing I would try. But for those of you that have done stereo miking, if you've got any advice here for Aria, would love to hear it. So thanks for that question there. Okay, then the last question is Ewan. For me, listening to some accents, particularly U.S. accents with increased nasality and elongated vowel sounds, I find really hard to listen to. It's not a value judgment on the person, just an involuntary reaction. I generally perceive certain sounds and frequencies more intensely as I'm autistic. Is there anything I could do with EQ or post-processing to try and adjust this? Not expecting to be able to transform them into a BBC radio announcer, but would like to learn more about what's possible. Or is there anything I can do by looking at the spectrogram of someone's voice and selectively playing back certain frequencies or sections to help me work out which aspect of their accent make it harder for me to listen to? Ewan also included a link to a particular podcast. I can't put that here just for copyright reasons, but that was helpful, Ewan. Thanks for that. Let me just let me pull up a video that we did some time ago on EQ for dialogue. Yes, if you go to the Mac there, Danny. Okay, so this video right here, EQ for dialogue, which I did.
Wait. Sorry.
Oh wait, here it is. EQ for dialogue, make your voice sound better with an equalizer. That's possibly something, Ewan, that I would recommend. It's not so much then, you can look at a spectrogram. I find the best way to do it, though, is by actually using the method we show in this video, which is essentially using an equalizer, boosting it by 9 dB, sweeping it back and forth until you find something that sounds especially grating, like it really hurts your ears, and then cut there. And you can narrow that cut somewhat, but usually cutting by 3, 4, you can even go more than that if you need to, but that should smooth out the sound for you and make it much less grating to listen to. So that's a technique that I would recommend if that's possible with your setup. So hopefully that helps you. Okay, let's go back out to the chat and see what questions, comments, or insights people have to share today in our little Soundy community here.
Okay, we're going to go way back.
Danny says we're going way back. Way back, evidently.
Well, you asked for a lot of participation,
so we have plenty of engagement here today, plenty of people getting in. Okay, still looking. Here we go. Okay, question from Bartek. How to set the sound level well for YouTube videos? Could you show this process step by step? Absolutely. In fact, I did that also on YouTube. We have an existing video. You can go watch it today as soon as we're done. Let me just do a search here. It is called How to Loudness Normalize Audio. This one right here, understanding how to loudness normalize your audio for video. That's the one where I show the exact process. We have an older one as well from 4 years ago. We show it there as well. So I would start with the newer one, and then if you want to take a look at the older one as well, those are both there and available to help you out with that. So it's a good question. Thanks for that. And hopefully one of those videos helps you. Okay, we're searching back through the archives.
We're really excited.
The archives of the chat.
We're really excited about gear.
Oh, we got excited about gear in here, it sounds like. That's okay.
Somebody nabbed some stuff on eBay.
Oh, somebody nabbed some stuff on eBay?
Yeah, two vintage Sennheisers.
Oh, vintage Sennheisers. Okay. Well. Camille, maybe not quite light and sound, but does a higher aperture give a better result when using a green screen, or does it not matter? It shouldn't matter, is my take on it. If you've got the person that you're assuming you have a person in front of the green screen, I wouldn't think that the aperture should make a difference if you have a clean key. I think the bigger difference is if you get spill from the background on your shoulders in a, as it basically turns into a rim light. So, all right. What is best practice for using iZotope with Resolve? Well, there are two ways to do it, and I actually think both ways are legitimate. And one is to plain and simply use the plugins within Resolve, within Fairlight. Just add them just like you would to tracks or to clips, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And then there are some tools, some modules in iZotope you can only do from the iZotope audio editor, so you have to round trip. So the way you just set that up is you go into your settings, you go to the Fairlight tab, I believe. I'm doing this from memory. Actually, we can probably pull it up right here, and I can show you exactly. So if you'll give me just a moment here, we'll get Fairlight pulled up and take a look at these. There we go, DaVinci Resolve. We're going to get an empty course here. Okay, let's go ahead and switch over to the Mac. So here I am in DaVinci Resolve. If we come up to DaVinci Resolve, I'm going to go to Preferences. Oh, it's the audio plugins that we go to. Down here under Setup External Audio Processes, you will add. You will give it a name here in this particular field here. So iZotope, you can see I already have it, but just to show you here, iZotope RX. You will have the type set to command line, and then when you click here, you will go and choose iZotope RX. We're getting closer. There it is. Go ahead and choose that as open. And we can go ahead and save that. I'm actually going to go ahead and remove it because I don't need two of them. And then when you are ready to work on an individual clip, what you can do is right-click, choose External Audio Process, and then choose that new round trip process that you just set up, and it will open it up in RX. And then once you're done processing it in RX, all you have to do is File Save, and then when you go back into back into Fairlight in Resolve, it will have replaced the original audio with the audio that you just cleaned up in RX. Now, if you're doing layered audio mixing in Resolve, it'll actually, I believe, not positive on this, but I believe it'll just put the new one on the top layer. So the original audio will not be destroyed. It's not a destructive process. It essentially creates, when you go to do the round trip over to RX, you're actually making a copy of the original clip. You're editing that copy, and then it's putting that copy in the place of the original in Resolve, and you can always go back to the original if you need to. So that's the overall process. Good question.
Okay, it was hard today.
I am so wrong. This is harder than music dictation. It just takes practice. This is bringing up bad memories of language lab in advanced French at university. I'm sorry. You start somewhere. It's hard the first few times, but as you get more experience with it, it becomes second nature. And at some point you'll be like, oh, I don't know why people aren't hearing that, because it's because you've trained your mind and your ears to be able to hear those things and address them. I think other people can tell what's happening. To them, they can't articulate it as well. For them, it's just like something doesn't sound really professional is often what they're doing. All right, now I'm curious about your HMI and LED comparison video. Nice cliffhanger. Well, I did. We didn't actually talk about HMIs because I've never used HMIs. I've been around them on sets a couple of times, but I've never actually used HMIs. And I did put out a short on YouTube that compared tungsten halogen lights to 3 different LED lights. And the overall upshot is that it's only the newest generation of LED lights where we're starting to see color quality that is really close to tungsten. Like a lot of LED lights are actually still pretty far off. Even when they get high CRI scores, when they get CRI scores in this 97, 98 range, they're still actually quite a ways off from tungsten lights. And I found that the metric that is best able to detect the differences, from my perspective, that I find the most useful is spectral similarity index, SSI. And if you get your SSI, if you work with an LED light that can get an SSI score of 90 or above, then what I found is, in particular, in our particular case, what we were looking at were skin tones. Then you'll find that the skin tones render almost exactly like they do on tungsten in most cases. So SSI is not a perfect metric because that single number doesn't tell you where the deficiencies are, and where the deficiencies are can be really important. But generally speaking, if you can get an LED that scores an SSI score of 90 or above, you're going to be really close to tungsten. So that's the short version. The video just didn't. It worked better as a short, I think, honestly. All right, as a light sound streaming oracle, do you, well, first of all, I'm not sure I'm an oracle. I do some of that. But do you expect anything new in the run-up to NAB, Blackmagic Design, Sony, Aperture, etc.? Yes. I don't know about Blackmagic or Sony. There will be some new things coming from Aperture, but I can't tell you about them right now. That's all. Okay. Danny's scouring the chat as we speak.
I think you've covered this, but it's probably worth.
Can watching the audio in Resolve help me see it? Yeah, absolutely, sometimes. I think I view that as a great way to train your ears, is actually seeing the waveform. When you see a waveform, you might be like, that's weird. And then you listen to it and you're like, oh, now I can hear why it looks weird. And that'll help you. That's a very good way to train your ears, actually, over time. Okay, brick wall limiter are a dead thing with 32-bit high bandwidth systems, but then again, people still use fax machines. Well, we can't broadcast 32-bit float audio right now. Just keep that in mind. So there is still a place for limiters. I just think they need to be used appropriately. That's the big thing. So usually, certainly in radio, in other forms of broadcast, they would have a brick wall limiter at the end of the signal chain. Obviously, some more subtle processing prior to that, but that was just to manage situations where something really got out of control, like there was screaming or yelling or 18 people laughing at the same time, each into their own mic, and the sum of that was just too much. And if all the other parts of the earlier process, post-process, or processing didn't catch it, then you had that brick wall limiter at the end to manage it. So in those circumstances, you shouldn't be hitting the brick wall limiter very often at all. So I just gave a really extreme example where I pulled the threshold all the way down to -15 and boosted the levels into the limiter to really make it sound squashed. Tim, I normally use a spectrum analyzer on my phone, which is adequate enough for quick analysis and adjustments. It may not be as precise as a dedicated real-time analyzer, but it's close enough. I completely agree, Tim. It's a useful tool. It's especially great for ear training. Just go throughout the world and turn on that real-time analyzer app. When you hear something, you're like, what's that frequency? Take your best guess and then take a look at your real-time analyzer, and that'll help you train your ears over time. Here's a note for Andrew, who had the first question about the live sound. When you do live sound with a recording, you have to focus on the live sound first. Doing this will help you give the attendees their money's worth. Fix recording problems in post. I think that's really good advice. Audio Buff, thanks for that. And I think that's probably what Andrew's planning on. He does have, I believe, a MixPre with 32-bit float recording, so he can pretty much set that and forget it for the most part. Just do a little testing it up front. But yeah, great advice. Completely agree. All right, from Bangs, regarding your Rode ME issue, the wireless Go 2, I noticed using USB power on receiver with a 3.5 millimeter out would usually produce lots of interference. It's only clean with a battery bank, not AC power. Okay, good. Thanks for that. I think what the problem was is that I was doing a bunch of tests, and so I had a USB cable plugged into the receiver as well as the 3.5 millimeter cable going to the camera. I left, and this is a mistake I should not have made. I should have known. I left the USB cable plugged into the receiver, and I think it was basically acting like an antenna. And the reason I left it plugged in is because between every test, which was just like, 15 seconds of recording. Then I'd walk back, connect my phone, change the settings on the wireless Me receiver, disconnect the cable, go back, record 15 more seconds, come back, plug back in. And I should have disconnected the USB cable each time because I think that's my hypothesis, and we're going to go test that at some point here before too long. Matt says we used 416s, Sennheiser MKH 416s, I assume, 6 inches off the ground, left and right at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock for river dance situation. But again, we were just wanting the sound of the feet. Yeah, I think if you want a mix of the laughing and the feet, and if it's Latin dancing and they're really stomping in some hard-soled shoes, I think you'll still get that. You could actually add another mic. Maybe put your F1 closer to the ground with its Omni lavalier mic. That may be able to pick up some of that as well. But yeah, if you just want the feet closer to the ground, makes sense. But you want to isolate it too. Well, maybe not. Yeah, no. I don't know. The vibrations, maybe you want the vibrations. Just have to gain very carefully. Question from Charles. My MixPre 3 didn't want to power I assume off USB connection from my Mac Mini and still be an audio interface. On the MixPre, there is a setting. I can actually, got mine right here. Let's just pull this out and power it up. There is I think it's a USB mode setting. It is under, I think it's under the system menu. And yeah, there are two settings. In the system menu, there's one called USB-C, and you can switch that to audio, and then change the USB audio to either normal or stereo, depending on whether you want just stereo or multi-track, normal for multi-track. But if you set that USB-C to audio, then your Mac Mini should be able to power the MixPre and use it as an audio interface at the same time. If the port on the Mac Mini is able to supply enough power, which it should be able to for a USB-C port. Yanti, what kind of mic or rig would you use for a short film dialogue in inside old empty giant industrial factory for wider shoot of 3 people? I don't have budget for 100 sound blankets. I would probably use lavalier microphones on each of them. That's how you're going to get the least amount of reverberation if that's what you're worried about. I'm assuming that's what you're worried about. But that'd be the first thing I'd do. Can boom them as well. But lavaliers generally will, because they have the body, they're attached to the body. If you're attaching the microphone in this area, the body will block a lot of what's coming, at least from behind. So that'll help. And because you're getting a good signal to noise ratio too, because the mic is right up against the sound source. Explaining sound characteristics is as difficult as describing a perfume or a fine wine. I completely agree. Over time, we start to develop the vocabulary for it, but yeah, it's a little elusive at first. Are the iZotope tools part of a software package or plugins looking for some tools to, I think there's a period there, plugins, looking for some tools to remove hums, uhs, and ds, other distracting element from audio recorded with video? Which tools are good? So iZotope is both. It's both a set of plugins, but there's also a dedicated audio editor, which you can round trip to. You can send it out of your video editing app or out of your digital audio workstation, your audio editing app, and send it over to RX Audio Editor and clean it up. Now, the plugins don't cover everything that iZotope can do. There's some things that it does offline, and those things can only be done in the audio editor. But if you're looking for things to dehum and DS, it has plugins for those. So yeah, you can remove those with iZotope RX plugins in your video editing app or digital audio workstation. Okay, Danny says we're over time. We have to go. This has been a fun one. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm just going to cue things up here. Whoops. This, my friends, is exactly why physical control surfaces and physical faders are really useful, because here I'm over fiddling on this software trying to find the right things up on the screen so I can fade my own voice out and bring the music in. that's just an explanation. Hope you have a great week. Get out there, make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody.